Hello viewers, in this video I will try to give you a little insight about an essay written by Stuart Hall, and the title of the essay is Cultural Studies and its Theoretical Legacies. From the title itself we can guess or we can assume that this essay is based on cultural studies. Okay. Uh, Before moving on, I would like to add one thing, and that is since English is not my native language, that's why my pronunciation it will not be satisfactory for you. I totally understand that, and I am extremely sorry for that thing. Another thing is, please read the original text line by line, words by words. Whatever I will say here through this video, it will be just a preliminary data from my side, and you can say this is just a perspective of mine and nothing else. Okay, do not take it as face value. Do your own research, do your own study, and have your own opinions, arguments. Okay, that's it. Now let's start our discussion. So before going on in a deep discussion, let's try to know what is cultural studies. Cultural studies is an interdisciplinary field drawing on theories and practices from a range of humanities and social sciences disciplines that seeks to investigate the ways in which cultures produced and are produced. Cultural studies is an interdisciplinary field that examines the political dynamics of contemporary culture, including popular culture and its historical foundations. Cultural studies researchers generally investigate how cultural practices relate to wider system of power associated with or operating through social phenomena. So, in a simple words, cultural study is an interdisciplinary field. Okay, it is not a homogenized field. Here, you will get different kinds of subjects. Okay, and you have to study those subjects. Okay, and it says that cultural studies it researchers generally investigate how cultural practices relate to wider systems of power associated with or operating through social phenomena. These include ideology, class structures, national formations, ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender, and generation. Employing cultural analysis, cultural studies views cultures not as fixed, bounded, stable, and discrete entities, but rather as constantly interacting and changing sets of practices and processes. The field of cultural studies encompasses a range of theoretical and methodological perspectives and practices, although distinct from the discipline of cultural anthropology and the interdisciplinary field of ethnic studies. Cultural studies draws upon and has contributed to each of these fields. Okay, if you read it, then you will automatically comprehend what these lines are trying to say. So I will not reiterate the meaning now. Okay, so let's try to know it in a more extensive way. Cultural studies was initially developed by British Marxist academics in the late 1950s, 1960s, and 1970s, and it has been subsequently taken up and transformed by scholars from many different disciplines around the world. Cultural studies is avowedly and even radically interdisciplinary and can sometimes be seen as anti-disciplinary. A key concern for cultural studies practitioners is the examination of the forces within and through which socially organized people conduct and participate in the construction of their everyday lives. So sometimes cultural study it is also considered as anti-disciplinary. Okay, sometimes it is considered as interdisciplinary and at simultaneously, in some cases, it is also termed as anti-disciplinary. Cultural studies combines a variety of politically engaged critical approaches drawn including semiotics, Marxism, feminist theory, ethnography, post-structuralism, post-colonialism, social theory, political theory, history, philosophy, literary theory, media theory, film video studies, communication studies, political economy, translation studies, museum studies, and art history criticism to study cultural phenomena in various societies and historical periods. So, the cultural study it takes the help of semiotics, Marxism, feminist theory, ethnography, post-structuralism, post-colonialism, social theory, political theory, history, philosophy, literary theory, media theory, film video studies, communication studies, political economy, translation studies, museum studies, and art and history criticism. So these all elements are taken for consideration in cultural studies. Without these ingredients, we cannot do justice if we do cultural studies. Okay, cultural studies seeks to understand how meaning is generated, disseminated, contested, bound up with systems of power and control, and produced from the social, political, and economic spheres within a particular social formation or conjuncture. The movement has generated important theories of cultural hegemony and agency. Its practitioners attempt to explain and analyze the cultural forces related and processes of globalization. During the rise of neoliberalism in Britain and the US, cultural studies both became a global movement, and it attracted the attention of many conservative opponents both within and beyond universities for a variety of reasons. And a worldwide movement of students and practitioners with a raft of scholarly associations and programs, annual international conferences and publications carry on work in this field today. Distinct approaches to cultural studies have emerged in different national and regional contexts. So that's a brief background about cultural studies. Now let's try to know about the author. Stuart Hall, he is also one of the prominent figures in cultural studies. Stuart Hall, he was born as Stuart Henry Macphail Hall, born on 3 February 1932 and died on 10 February 2014. He was a Jamaican-born British Marxist sociologist, cultural theorist, and political activist. He, along with Richard Hogarth and Raymond Williams, was one of the founding figures of the school of thought that is now known as British Cultural Studies or the Birmingham School of Cultural Studies. And in the 1950s, Hall was a founder of the influential New Left Review. At Hogarth's invitation, he joined the Center for Contemporary Cultural Studies, known as CCCS, at Birmingham University in 1964, and Hall also took over from Hogarth as acting director of the CCCS in 1968, and he became its director in 1972 and remained there until 1979. While at the center, Hall is also credited with playing a role in expanding the scope of cultural studies to deal with race and gender, and with helping to incorporate new ideas derived from the work of French theorists such as Michel Foucault. Hall left the center in 1979 to become a professor of sociology at the Open University, and he was president of the British Sociological Association from 1995 to 1997. And he retired from the Open University in 1997 and was professor emeritus there until his death. British newspaper named The Observer called him one of the country's leading cultural theorists. Hall was also involved in the Black Arts movement, and movie directors such as John Akomfrah and Isaac Julian also see him as one of their heroes. Besides, Hall was married to Catherine Hall, who was also a feminist professor of modern British history at University College London, with whom he had 2 children. After his death, Stuart Hall was described as one of the most influential intellectuals of the last 60 years. And the Stuart Hall Foundation was established in 2015 by his family, friends, and colleagues to work collaboratively to forge creative partnership in the spirit of Stuart Hall, thinking together and working towards a racially just and more equal future. So that's it about the writer. I hope you have been enlightened about the writer's life and his deeds. Now let's try to know the brief summary of the essay. Okay, so the essay name is Cultural Studies and its Theoretical Legacies. Through this essay, the writer Stuart Hall, he has tried to depict some theoretical legacies related to cultural studies according to him. Okay. The essay Cultural Studies and its Theoretical Legacies, it is written by Jamaican-born British Marxist sociologist, cultural theorist, and political activist Stuart Henry Macphail Hall, and he is one of the founding fathers of British cultural studies, along with Richard Hogarth and Raymond Williams that we have already read. In the said essay, the writer has emphasized on cultural studies. He further states that he sometimes feels like a tableau vivant, which is a spirit of the past resurrected when talking about cultural studies. Okay, and he remarks that cultural studies emerged somewhere at the moment when he first met Raymond Williams and Richard Hogarth. Besides, he has argued that autobiography is usually thought of as seizing the authority of authenticity. And Stuart Hall tried to talk about certain theoretical legacies and moments in cultural studies, not because it is the truth or the only way of telling the history. So he said like this: Cultural studies is a discursive formation in Foucault's sense. It has no simple origins, though some of us were present at some point when it first named itself in that way. Much of the work out of which it grew, in my own experience, was already present in the work of other people. Raymond Williams has made the same point, charting the roots of cultural studies in the early adult education movement in his essay on the future of cultural studies, 1989. So this is a quotation I have taken from the text. If you read it, then you will get it. In addition to that, cultural studies has multiple discourses, according to Stuart Hall, as he has mentioned in the essay. It has a number of different histories. It is a whole set of formations. It has its own different conjectures and moments in the past. It included many different kinds of work. He further states that theoretical work in the Center for Contemporary Cultural Studies is more appropriately called theoretical noise, according to him. Moreover, it is accompanied by a great deal of bad feeling, argument, unstable anxieties, and angry silences. The author also opines that he is not happy with any formulation related to cultural studies. Although cultural studies as a project is open-ended, but it can't be simply pluralist in that way. So Stuart Hall, he at last agrees that it refuses to be a master discourse or a meta discourse of any kind. So he has said these things related to cultural studies and its theoretical legacies. So I have taken some quotation from the text where he has emphasized on cultural studies legacies in his own perspective. Yes, it is a project that is always open to that which it doesn't yet know, to which it can't yet name, but it does have some will to connect. It does have some stake in the choices it makes. It does matter whether cultural studies is this or that. It can't be just any old thing which chooses to march under a particular banner. It is a serious enterprise or project, and that it is scribed in what it sometimes called the political aspect of cultural studies. So through this quotation, he has tried to delineate about some aspects of cultural studies which is also related to politics. Okay. However, the author also mentions that his deconstruction, it has to do with a view of British cultural studies related to cultural studies, which often distinguishes it by the fact that at a certain moment it became a Marxist critical practice. So he has said like this: what exactly does that assignation of cultural studies as a Marxist critical theory mean? How can we think cultural studies at that moment? What moment is it we are speaking of? What does that mean for the theoretical legacies, traces, and after effects which Marxism continues to have in cultural studies? There are a number of telling that history, and let me remind you that I am not proposing this as the only story, but I do want to set it up in what I think may be slightly surprising way to you. So this is the quotation from the text where the writer has tried to mention about Marxist critical theory related to cultural studies. Is it significant? Is it relevant or not? And he has also said that Marxism is not only element in the context of cultural studies. Then the writer says that he entered cultural studies from the New Left, and the New Left always regarded Marxism as a problem, as a trouble, as a danger, not as a solution. So the writer says that New Left, this is a political movement, so they have always thought Marxism as a problem, not a solution in the context of cultural studies. So let's try to know about New Left. The New Left was a broad political movement, mainly in the 1960s and 1970s, consisting of activists in the Western world who campaigned for a broad range of social issues such as civil and political rights, environmentalism, feminism, gay rights, gender roles, and drug policy reforms. And some see the New Left as an oppositional reaction to the earlier Marxist and labor union movements for social justice that focused on dialectical materialism and social class, while others who use the term to see the movement as a continuation and revitalization of traditional leftist goals. Some who self-identified as New Left rejected involvement with the labor movement and Marxism's historical theory of class struggle, although others gravitated to their own texts on established forms of Marxism and Marxism-Leninism, such as New Communist movement, which drew from Maoism in the United States, or the K-Gruppen, or the German-speaking world. In the United States, also the movement was associated with anti-war college campus protest movement, including the free speech movement. So here we have got to know about New Left movement history. Now let's try to know in a simple words what is Marxism. You must have heard, but let me tell you again. Marxism, this is a social, economic, and political philosophy that analyzes the impact of the ruling class in the laborers, leading to uneven distribution of wealth and privileges in the society, and it also stimulates the workers to protest against the injustice suffered by them, imposed by the upper class. Notwithstanding, Stuart Hall has critiqued that there never was a prior moment when cultural studies and Marxism represented the perfect theoretical fit. From the beginning, to use this way of speaking for a moment, there was always already the question of great inadequacies, theoretically and politically, the resounding silences, the great evasions of Marxism, the things that Marx did not talk about or seem to understand, which were our privileged object of study, culture, ideology, language, the symbolic, according to the writer. And these were always already instead the things which had imprisoned as a mode of thought, as an activity of critical practice, its orthodoxy, its doctrinal character, its determinism, its reductionism, its immutable law of history, its status as meta-narrative, and that is to say, the encounter between British cultural studies and Marxism, it should first to be understood as the engagement with a problem, not a theory, not even problematic. Apart from that, the writer Stuart Hall has also elucidated about the question of race in cultural studies. He said that actually getting cultural studies to put on its own agenda is the critical question of race, the politics of race, the resistance to racism, the culture, the critical questions of cultural politics was itself a profound theoretical struggle, a struggle of which policing the crisis was curiosity, the first and very late example. However, the writer has also focused on AIDS. As you all know, AIDS is virus. He remarks that AIDS is one of the questions which urgently brings before us our marginality as critical intellectual in making real effects on the world. So this is here the writer has talked about AIDS in the context of cultural studies, how it has affected cultural studies. And yet it has often been represented for us in contradictory ways against the urgency of people dying in the streets. What in God's name is the point of cultural studies, according to the Stuart Hall? What is the point of the study of representation if there is no response to the question of what you say to someone who wants to know if they should take a drug, and if that means they will die 2 days later or few months earlier? At that point, I think, according to the writer, he thinks anybody who is into cultural studies seriously as an intellectual practice must feel on their pulse its ephemerality, its substantiality, how little it registers, how little we have been able to change anything or get anybody to do anything. Then the author also expounds that the questions of AIDS is an extremely important terrain of struggle and contestation. In addition to the people we know who are dying or have died or will, there are the many people dying who are never spoken of. How could we say that the question of AIDS is not also a question of who gets represented and who does not? Okay, AIDS is the site at which the advance of sexual politics is being rolled back. It's a site at which not only people will die, but desire and pleasure will also die if certain metaphors do not survive or survive in the wrong way. Unless we operate in this tension, we don't know what cultural studies can do, according to the writer, can't do and can never do, but also what it has to do, what it also has a privileged capacity to do, and it has to analyze certain things about the constitutive and political nature of representation itself, about its complexities, about the effects of language, about textuality as a side of life and death. Those are the things cultural studies can address, according to him. Then at the end of the essay, the writer says that the question of theoretical fluency, it is a difficult and provoking metaphor to discuss and address. And he said that he wants only to he wanted only to say one word about it some time ago, looking at what one could only call the deconstructive deluge as opposed to the deconstructive turn which had overtaken American literary studies in its formalist mode. He tried to distinguish the extremely important theoretical and intellectual work which it had made possible in cultural studies from a mere repetition, a sort of mimicry or deconstructive ventriloquism which sometimes passes as a serious intellectual exercise. The writer then says that his fear at that moment was that if cultural studies gain an equivalent institutionalization in the American text, it would in rather the same way formalize out of existence the critical questions of power, history, and politics.